ever since I saw it happen, I said, oh my gosh, this is an existential threat to our industry.
If we had the tech, we could overlay that on our real estate and then charge the customers for it. Now, it's not an existential threat, but an added value option that we can utilize.
I think, in the next couple of years, we're going to see some real big revolutions in technology that serves our industry, and it's going to catapult us to a level that we've never seen before.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Self-Storage Income Podcast. We have a special edition episode for you guys today, which is a re-release of one of our top 10 episodes with none other than Steve Mirabito himself, the legend. He sits on the board of Storelocal, the largest co-op in the world of self-storage as well, in and among a number of other things. In this episode today, we talk about what he sees in the self-storage industry, how it's come to be the asset class that it is today, what he sees in competition, how he sees the future of self-storage. Being a part of Storelocal, he's obviously very, very invested and very interested in seeing the continued success of self-storage. So it's very interesting to see and to hear what he has to say about where the storage industry is today, where he's seeing it going, and essentially what his story has been throughout being involved in the self-storage industry. So with that said, I'll let you guys get to it. Steve Mirabito, enjoy.
Welcome, everybody, to Self-Storage Income. And today we have a podcast that has been a long time in the making. I'm really excited for this one, Connor, because Steve Mirabito, who is a friend of mine, he sits on the Storelocal board with me. And he is one of the people in the industry that I view are, a juggernaut, right? Like he's one of the big boys. He knows not only what he's doing, but there's a few people in this industry that have the experience that he has and knowledge. So this is a real treat for us. So should we bring him in?
Yeah, no, I'm super excited. And man, Steve, when AJ calls you a big boy, you know you've made it, man.
That's right. That's it. That's right. I only reserve that to my 5-year-old. So
I'm impressed.
Well, seriously, man, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. And, to get started, why don't you just tell everybody your backstory, right? How did you get into this industry? And then kind of where you're at today.
I am probably one of the older guys in the industry, but I learned from the oldest guys in the industry and the first generation operators. So I got into the industry because back in 1985, I'm fresh out of school, trying to learn the real estate industry, working for a development company in the Central Valley of California. And we were doing real estate acquisitions and dispositions from Beverly Hills to, Sacramento, and analyzing properties. And then all of a sudden, two pivotal things in my life happened. The first was there was something called public storage, and public storage wanted to buy a piece of property that we owned in Stockton, California. And our responsibility after the contract was signed was to approve the design of the building, make sure it was architecturally compatible to the design of the neighborhood. And so that was the first situation that took place. And then the second was the Tax Reform Act of 1986. So we'll talk about the PS story first. So public storage is in the office with my boss, and they're going through the plans. We're looking at the plans and studying it. And all of a sudden, my boss scratches his head. He says, wow, this is a cash flow business, isn't it? And the gentleman in charge of acquisitions for public storage said, yes, it is. And it happened to be his very last property that he was purchasing for public storage before he retired. So needless to say, as my boss always told me, he said, well, when people are ready to retire, they'll tell you everything. And sure enough, he spilled his guts and told us everything about the storage industry that even to this day I use. And it was just great intelligence and knowledge and input. And we sold the property to Public Storage. Meantime, the Tax Reform Act of 1986 took place. And what happened there was the federal government gave some very luxurious tax deductions and incentives to build real estate during the early 80s in order to get the economy kickstarted. Well, by 86, President Reagan and Congress came to an agreement to get rid of a lot of these passive loss rules. And if you're, and bottom line is self-storage, just like every other real estate, needed to become a cash flow generator and not a cash loss or a financial loss, especially on your income taxes. So the company I was working for had, half of Hollywood signed up, taking all these very unprofitable condominium projects throughout the country. And I think it was, for every dollar they invested, they got $4 or $5 in tax returns. So IRS changed the rules and no more $4 or $5, to every dollar invested tax returns. So all that property really became unusable. Well, the company got into a financial problem because they got stuck with property that had a value much less than what they had built it for. So a combination of those things, my boss goes to the president of the company and says, hey, let's build self-storage as a cash flow vehicle. And so I got into it, started studying it, and I was on the road. I'd be working, 6 o'clock in the morning till midnight every day, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, just trying to understand and study the industry. And we started to build self-storage properties, and one after the other. And this is back in the late 80s. It became a phenomenal business model. And by 1990, I said, I'm so burnt out building storage, I'm going to just go off on my own. And they're like, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know, but I'm going to do something. And I said, I'll be a janitor if I have to. But a good friend of mine and an industry veteran by the name of Tom Litton, who passed away several years back, but he said, Steve, stay in the storage industry and get into management. I said, I don't know anything about management. He said, yes, you do. He said, your dad owned a grocery store, and before I came along, you were doing all the termination of employments for the company. So you know how everything operates. So needless to say, in 1990, I started a management company. And then at the same time, an industry veteran by the name of Jerry Mooney, who was one of the first, if not first, self-storage consultants on the West Coast, called me and said, Steve, I'm retiring. Take my business over. And I said, well, how much? And he said, you know what? Just take my business over. I'm giving you the goodwill of the business. I know you know what you're doing. And from 1990 forward, it started with the name of Mirabito, Mooney and Associates. I kept his name and developed, the self-storage management practices he had designed. I implemented, and we did a lot of feasibility and viability studies. I worked on that through the 90s, and then subsequently, I got restless to get back into the real estate development. And by the mid 90s, I was building self-storage properties for myself. And I've got a partner, and we build pretty much, a property every year ever since. And the interesting thing is about 1998, 99, looking at it, and it's like, we can call ourselves John Storage or My first property that I built was called Industrial 880 Self Storage because we always would use the street address or something low down in the alphabet so that we'd have first position in the yellow pages. And I said, this industry has got to change, and we have to have a brand. And so I started the brand name StoragePRO, and probably one of the first independent operators that manage properties for third parties to create a brand name. And that was in the late 90s, and here we are 25 years later, still using the name and growing the name.
Are you a new self-storage investor and want to know what that facility is worth, what the risk is, how to underwrite it? Well, that's exactly what we do in a feasibility study. A feasibility study, we actually look at the market for you. We look at the finances, the underwriting, we show you where the upside is, the downside, and all the risk. That is actually what you can provide to banks to get capital and investors. It's a big worksheet, which most banks actually require. So if you want to know what a storage facility is worth that you're looking at, come to us, follow the link in the show notes, and we will tell you. And, a lot of people, to give context, not the birthplace, but basically, where storage really erupted, right? Where I view it as like the epicenter of storage worldwide, which was Southern California. So it was, a lot of the staples in the industry with the biggest owners, the large portfolios of private guys, public guys, everything, they all came out of that region, and you were one of those people. And as far as most of the United States goes, you were very much ahead of the self-storage curve. It was a thing there when, it just wasn't in a lot of the United States. How did the self-storage industry really change from, the 80s, especially from Southern California to the rest of the nation, till, it not only just till now, but really till the 2000s, particularly the financial crisis before that. How did that look, and what was happening? Were people getting excited about it, or was it, how did institutions, everyone view the asset, and what were the struggles there as this industry progressed?
Ever since the 80s, banks looked at self-storage as a single purpose entity. And they had real heart palpitations wanting to lend on a self-storage property. Their feeling was, number one, they didn't know the business. Number two, we were pretty new, right, as an industry. Everybody is calling it mini warehouse, mini storage. And we kept on telling the banks and people in the cities, hey, it's self-storage, it's self-service storage. But the biggest thing is the lending. There is no lending allowed. And that really kept the supply of product constricted. And it was only larger operators like Public Storage that facilitated into partnerships and helped be able to finance their properties. That was their go-to operation, and they succeeded extremely well, as we all know. But for smaller companies, and even a company like I work for as a real estate development company, a pretty large operator, they had to pretty much arm twist every bank and say, hey, you want to do a residential project with us? We'll do it with you, but you got to do a storage facility with us, alongside it. Oh, we don't know storage. Well, either you want our residential project, you're going to do a storage project. And a lot of arm twisting, but the banks would relent and grant us a loan. And that really lasted for, probably way into 2010, I bet. And some of the smaller banks who understood the business and had financed them previously had a little niche of a business, and were able to repeat loans to every operator. And nobody ever, there are very few foreclosures on storage. And all along, we would get, there'd be newspaper articles or magazine articles about this new up and coming industry called self-storage or mini storage, and how it was going to completely radicalize the whole real estate industry, and that it was going to become a real big sector in the real estate community. And kept on reading them. It's interesting. One article, I was interviewed for the San Francisco Chronicle in the mid '90s. A front page article about up and coming business called self storage. So people were interested. They knew about it, but they knew it was happening, but nobody really saw that it was really happening and changing as we were living through it.
It's so interesting because the barriers of entry that you guys faced were huge, but not just on the institutional side, everything else. What was it on the financing side? What was it like working with the city when you're trying to build a storage facility, which I'm sure a lot of those cities, they probably didn't really understand it, in the 80s and early 90s. What was that like? Because you built a lot. How was it working with the cities and the counties on the development process back then?
Yeah, very interesting question and great question. Believe it or not, cities were great to work with. They welcomed storage because we were a low traffic generator. And at that time, especially in California, they were recognizing, hey, we got traffic problems that are getting out of control. And self-storage was a great land use because it slowed, limited amount of trips per day. And storage is one of the lowest traffic generating land uses out there. The other thing cities recognized is it was a great transitional buffer between commercial and residential neighborhoods. Unfortunately, over the past few years or last decade, cities have said, well, this is just not what we want in our backyard or at the front door of our community. We want something higher and better. But the self-storage industry has adjusted, and we've improved the look of the facilities. That they're beautiful pieces of real estate, and that every owner and every community would be totally proud to have at their front door.
Absolutely. And that brings me to, why don't you talk about your portfolio today? Where is it? What's it consist of? And also the makeup of time frame of the assets. Like how many are new? How many have you held on for? How long? Because I'd love to dive in from that and talk about performance of the assets over these times and what you've seen.
Sure. Interestingly, we're not merchant builders. My partner and I made a commitment back in the mid 90s that we would never sell anything. And since 1995, we've retained ownership of every property that we have built. And our portfolio has consisted of only new development projects. We do not acquire existing properties. Our business plan is just to build. I love building. I love going through the entitlement process. And as a result, we've built up a pretty good portfolio of properties here in Northern California.
Yeah, that's, it's amazing, first of all, that you guys actually stuck with it, that I'm sure you have gotten offers over that time that are mind-boggling compared to where you started and valuations. To hold strong to that definitely benefited you over this period.
Especially when you see, cap rates dropping from compressing from, 12% to 10%, and down to 4 and 5% today. It's completely revolutionized the economics of self-storage.
And how about the overall look and feel? Like self-storage has changed a lot in how we view it in the city, and what you're building today, I'm assuming, right, is very different when you're building in California than maybe to how it looked in the 80s or 90s. What was that process like? Because I know your properties. I have seen them, and they're gorgeous. You do a very, very good job. You're obviously one of the most experienced people out there in this. And how did that change? Was that a driven, did you see a drive in the customers wanting change? Was there always talk of drive up versus climate controlled? And was it cities that were saying, we want it to change how it looks? How has that evolved over that period of time?
Yeah. Well, here in Northern California, land is very short in supply. As a result, as much as I love building single-story properties throughout the 90s and 80s and 90s and 2000s, the cost of land underneath, the dirt underneath each one of these buildings is just too expensive. So we ultimately had to go up vertically. And most of the properties that are being built today were at 3 stories and some at 4 stories to accommodate it. I think 2 things. So it's economics, and then at the same time, the city did not want to see chain link fences and ugly orange doors. So they expected something better. So it was a good marriage between economics and city expectations, and we were able to deliver and perform. And to the surprise and chagrin of not only the neighbors but the communities, what we said we would build, we built, and we have built a great reputation of being not only a great neighbor but a great member of the community as a result of that.
I love that.
Technology is the name of the game, and how you operate your facility and the efficiency at which you can operate will depend on the technology you use. Your property management system, what it allows you to do, and what you have access will determine the outcome of how that facility performs. That's why we go with Tenant Inc. with their product Hummingbird, because they are the best in class. When dealing with automation, when dealing with move-ins, customer acquisition process, improving my online acquisition process, they are bar none the best. So if you are looking to automate your facility or operate it in a best in class way, make sure you guys are looking at Tenant Inc. and their product Hummingbird. The link is in the description.
I'm going to just change the subject for a minute because, and running parallel with this is right from the beginning, I always observed storage just like motels in the hotel industry. And I've heard it occasionally discussed, but I truly believe that we are very, very genetically connected to the hotel industry. We do everything the storage does everything on a 30-day basis, on a month-to-month basis. Hotels do things on a daily basis. But we have so many different similarities that it's shocking. And in some areas, I think we do a better job than the hotel industry. And then other areas, the hotel industry is showing me. I listen to some podcasts and professors talking and experts in the hotel industry talking, and I'm hearing great ideas that they're coming up with for the hotel industry that we need to be adapting. And the time frame we 30, 40 years ago, we were probably a 30, 40 year, age difference in terms of development and technology compared to the hotels. Today, I think we are, side by side in terms of how we've evolved technologically as well as the design of the properties. I put up one of my StoragePRO properties to a hotel, any of these budget hotels. I think we built a much better product. It looks nicer. It's very, very attractive. And it really, some of these properties, are jaw-dropping. And one of the greatest things I love hearing is, from the planning department saying, "Hey, Steve, I never expected to see a storage property that looks like this." Well, that's what we had to do. The hotel industry has done the same thing, right? But if you look at the hotels, back in the 50s and 60s, they were single-story,
drive up. You drive right up to their room.
No fence around it, but there wasn't a fence. Maybe a swimming pool on the front.
Yeah.
Interstates came by, those babies have gone sideways, but they're still there. But they've seen their best of their economic days. But it's the same thing with storage, and I tell StoragePRO is one of the leading independent third-party management companies in the nation. We manage well over 100 properties and am growing. And I tell clients, and I beg with them, I say, guys and ladies, we're no different than the hotel industry or even Walmart versus Kmart. If you build a good product, people will come. If you don't reinvest in your product, people will leave. Now, there's a reason why there are Walmarts that have been replaced with super Walmarts. And in the meantime, the Kmarts have gone, bye-bye. So no more blue light specials at Kmarts because they never kept up with the competition and reinvented themselves. And we have to do that in the self-storage industry as well.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, it's such an important aspect to recognize these cross-industry touch points and these parallels and comparisons that you can make, and recognizing what the markets are demanding and expecting, and therefore those customers and consumers and what they're demanding and expecting as well. So we're making those parallels with, the hospitality, hotel industry, and even within our own industry, what are we seeing these other, whether they're institutional grade facilities, portfolios, whatever operators, recognizing those shifts that need to happen. And like you said, maintaining those over time and growing and improving where, your portfolio and the assets are either improving or they're dying. If you're not growing, you're dying.
100%.
You'd want to be a green tomato, not a red tomato.
Yes.
There you go.
We were literally having this conversation, Steve, this morning where we were discussing with another operator, and we were talking about, we're like, self-storage is like the hotel business. And we're trying to explain to them, like, it has more similarities to the hotel business, because they're like, oh yeah, it's, a lot of people say, oh, it's like industrial. We're like, no, it's not. It is not like industrial. From the standpoint, you have a triple net lease, you have somebody that rents it out. It's a big space. They are operating in and out of it, right? In a lot of cases, we can see how people may think that, but it's way more closely related to the hotel industry. And I remember when we'd been in self-storage for a while, we were going to get into it in a much bigger way. And it was when we started talking with others, and it was when Storelocal was coming about, and it was from you and other operators that we're having those discussions with that just seemed to understand this. Like, the role of technology in this industry, the role of branding, the role of leveraging buying capabilities. And I remember that there were a handful of operators, principally the ones that were talking with us and starting up Storelocal. And it was like, if we don't act right, we're going to go the way of the hotel industry, and it's going to be all singular brands. It's going to be, a lot like that. And when did people really start thinking? Because at the time, and this was, we're talking after '08, so this was 010, maybe 12 when Storelocal was getting started, and we were all the founding members were getting started and discussing it. But that at that time, that was rare. Like it was, we were pitching like a co-op to members as, oh, well, you can get purchasing power, and that's how you sold them. Where it was really, though, the founding members things were talking about this change, saying we don't want to become like the hotel industry. We don't want to be consolidated all under a few brands. And this is important. When did you hear people start realizing self-storage is not what it was, and we have to think about it differently, and we have to look towards these other asset classes? Like, when did you start thinking about that and seeing that? Because even at the time when the founding members were discussing that, that was still rare in the storage industry to be thinking like that. When did you start to see the change?
I think Lance Watkins, who founded Storelocal, was probably the only independent operator that saw it. And I will hats off to Lance because of his brilliance and seeing what was happening in the industry. I'll never forget the day he came to me and said, Steve, he says, we're looking at, putting together this co-op. I said, Lance, I'm in. He said, well, I didn't have to sell you. How come? I said, Lance, back in 1970, my dad owned a grocery store. They owned 3 or 4 different grocery stores. And they were small 5,000-6,000 square foot operations, which is a good size operation back in the 70s. And they were independent. They remained independent. But all of a sudden, we had inflation and cost of goods started going up. And the independent operators that controlled the market, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, now all of a sudden we're losing control of the market. They lack, coordination. They lack the computerization and the technology. They lack the distribution processes. And as a result, larger operators came in that were publicly owned and took over and pretty much gobbled up the entire market share on the Eastern Seaboard. And the independent guys that were brilliant and know how to run a grocery store excellently are now all out of business. So I saw that as a kid, and I knew my dad, saw it and said, gosh, we need a co-op. We need somebody, to work we all need to be working together, not, separately. But he had such challenges in getting, let's say, 10 or 15 different independent operators to work together. And these guys weren't competing head on. They were, probably in a 50-mile radius of each other. So they were unwilling to look and see what was happening in the industry, and they were unwilling to work together. And I saw that the same thing in the storage industry. For years, I would pitch independent owners and say, hey, guys, you want to make a couple $1,000s a month? And they're like, yeah, how do you do that? I said, how about if I put my advertisement for my storage facility or one that I manage along with yours in the front page of the Yellow Page book? And they're like, oh, no way. I said, but you're paying $48,000 a year for advertising, and this is in the 90s. Okay. Yeah. And I'll split the cost. We're not going to compete with each other because you're 3, 4, 5 miles away from my property. Mm-hmm. And they refused to do it. I'll remember one operator said to me, he says, well, who's going to get the top side and who's going to get the bottom? I said, I don't care. You take whatever you want, but we just need a presence, and we're going to save ourselves, cut the advertising cost in half. So nobody saw that happening in our industry. And it's very similar to what I experienced in the grocery business. So when Lance came and said, hey, let's look at putting something together. I was like, I'm here for you. I'm ready to join.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah. And it's so similar to our story where it was our experience in another industry just like yours that was being consolidated amongst major operators and everything. And we were a part of that, and they started to lose their ability to really compete. So when Lance came to us, like you, he's like a virus, isn't he? He just spreads. So
yeah, gets around.
It gets around. So when he came to us as well, we were just like, same thing. We're like, oh, we're in. He's like, wait, what do I have to say? We're like, we've been through this in other industries. Like, we know, we get it. And that's hence the reason why, we have this podcast. Hence the reason why we do these things. We're trying to ensure the industry. And I often tell people, they're like, AJ, you literally get on every week and tell everybody your secrets. And they're like, why are you telling everyone what you do in the industry and how you do it? And I'm like, a rising tide lifts all ships. If you are profitable, I'm profitable. If I'm in a city, why do you think that the person that's 3 miles down the road is suffering with low vacancy, not being able to compete? Why would I think that I would be able to just be fine? Like that doesn't make sense. I'm like, if I want to remain independent and others want to remain independent, we need to be able to compete. And there's storage facilities everywhere, all over the United States. It's not like I'm like, oh, I'm going to miss out on something, right? But we can ensure that. And I just think that's a really, really important piece.
Mm-hmm. It is. And just kudos to you guys for recognizing the need for a co-op like Storelocal and consolidating those resources and owners and operators. I know, AJ, you'd mentioned that, it's not very common in the storage industry, but I would say it's even back then or even today, whether it was 2010 or now, I still feel like that's thinking outside the box. I mean, you don't hear of or see of, or at least I don't, of a lot of that taking place or occurring. And when you're talking about these aspects of consolidation or having things like, Lance is always talking about online, market share and in real estate and what that looks like. And those major resources that, so many people aren't even considering. Just hats off to you guys for recognizing the need and starting to build this, a decade ago.
With that and all these changes, and obviously the last 10 years has been crazy. What do you see today in the storage industry? What worries you? What opportunities do you see coming over the next, 5 years and 10 years?
One current topic, which I found very interesting, is the challenges that Blackstone has with their private REIT. They're doing so well that investors are wanting to cash out. So they've had to put limits on the exiting it. I'm going to guess there's a lot of storage product in that portfolio. And, on an immediate basis, I have a feeling there may be opportunities coming down the pipe because our industry has done so well that operators like BlackRock are going to have to cash out. They're not here for the long haul. They're not going to be, we're a small enough industry. I truly believe there's going to be opportunities as a result of that. The second big thing is, and I started this in 2010, recognizing I can't manage my properties, the ones I own, if I'm only managing my properties and maybe a few others as a management company. I was doing a disservice to myself, to my partner, and to my clients. And I realized, even though I was managing 20 properties back then, I said, I have to grow this company. It's either grow or get out of the business and pass it on to another third-party operator. So we elected to grow, and I poured my soul into growing the company. And we went from about 20 back in about 2010 to now we're well north of 100 properties and growing. And so the big takeaway from there is, as we add another property, we're not competing. We've got properties side by side with each other. I may own a property, or I may have two clients that own, properties side by side. But the systems, the processes, the technologies that a larger operator like myself can deliver are so much further superior and so much more valuable for the independents. So the story is, you're an independent operator, you really do need a third-party operator to manage for you. You will make a lot more money with a third-party operator. I've been through every problem in the book that nobody, half the industry doesn't even know. So we deliver because of the technology and the changes in the industry, to remain relevant and be profitable, you have to have a third party managing your property. And then the third big one is technology. When I got into the industry, I would beg, let's say, for example, a lien letters. I said, there's a company out there called More Business Solutions or More Business Systems, and they had a pre-formatted lien certified letter that you could print off your dot matrix printer. But I could not pay a technology company, a software management company, enough money for them to redesign their format of their lien letters so that we could eliminate this mundane process that the managers had to do on the first of the month, every month. And it would burn them out, and there are always inaccuracies with it. Well, today, the industry is changing, technology is changing, and we have the opportunity out there since technology is so much cheaper to adapt, we have the opportunity to really put that into our facilities and improve our operations. And one of the examples is, since COVID, listening to Cornell University Hotel School presentation, they had some speakers on what's the next technology that's going to hit the hotel front. And one of the presenters said, hey, I started this company. We can detect air quality. And eventually, we're going to be in every room, in every hallway of a hotel. I'm like, why aren't we doing that in the storage industry? We need technology to just say, yes, we can slap that in there and put that into every, hallway in a storage unit very inexpensively, but we need the technology to adapt to it. So I think, in the next couple of years, we're going to see some real big revolutions in technology that serves our industry, and it's going to catapult us to a level that we've never seen before.
I totally agree. Speaking of technology, what do you view as these third, like a lot of people talk about these outside companies, like what are they, like Nextdoor, or these storage tech platforms that are the Uber of storage, where they're, delivery, remote, they're all of those different kind of things, which are trying to take a piece of the storage pie. And I remember, 5 years ago, there was a lot of hype where I was like, oh, storage is going to die because of these new entry technologies that people are using. There was a company out of Utah that is Airbnb of storage, where they allow people to rent out the garage. And what is your opinions or thoughts on these other ones that we've seen for a while now? We've seen the first big one was the delivery one, right? And that was well over 10 years ago. And that everybody said 10, 15 years ago, this is going to take over storage, right? And storage will be gone, and never did. What do you view about these new companies that are popping up and their effect on storage? Do you see like risks or merit in them? Where do you think they do good? Where do you think they do bad?
Well, I think that's where we need technology, and I think it's right around the corner for our industry. I believe the valet storage, I think that's what you're talking about. Ever since I saw it happen, I said, oh my gosh, this is a existential threat to our industry. And I've spoken to appraisers, investors, developers, and they're like, but there's no problem with it. We're not seeing any impact. I would disagree. Our analytics show that they're probably picking off a good supply of our small unit customers. And as we all know, the small units are the highest rent per square foot in the business. So in some of these urban areas, they have an impact. Using the Bay Area, for example, self-storage, there's been very few self-storage facilities that have been able to successfully get developed because of land use regulations. So there's a lot of barriers to entry here in the Bay Area. And because of that difficulty, plus we got Generation X and Zs that, quite frankly, I admire because they, with all due respect, not necessarily the most energetic people out there that want to do physical labor work. And as a result, they're not going to want to go to a storage unit, and spend their Saturday afternoon when they could be watching a college football game or going surfing. They're not going to want to go to a Saturday afternoon, go to a storage unit to put all their stuff in. So I truly believe our industry has got to adapt and take that technology and apply it in self-storage. We're going to have to be a hybrid between pure self-service storage and a valet product that we will pick up and we will deliver the product to you. May not be, we may not have the big fleets, but I've driven by some of these valet storage warehouses, and I wrote an article on this a couple of years back. We are rich in real estate in the self-storage industry and limited in technology. The valet guys are very rich in technology, but limited in real estate. But they can scale their real estate needs. You go out to a place like in Tracy, California, and I've seen and witnessed, one of the valet storage operators that serves the entire Bay Area grow from a very small storefront warehouse operation into, at last count, I believe they have well north of 20 to 30, the equivalent space for 20 to 30 self-storage facilities that they've built out in their warehouse. So it is a existential threat. It may not be affecting most people right now, but I guarantee you over the next 5 years, it's going to change our industry.
I agree. And really, you're at the heart of that. The valet storage really took hold in the Bay Area. Like, that was the area at first. We have a valet storage here, which is, I don't even know if they even do it anymore. And people were like, oh yeah, it didn't really do anything. And I'm like, well, it didn't do anything, but that's just because it's so early. And I'm like, you got to look at this in areas where I believe valet is doing well, which like the Bay Area, because it's an economic thing, right? And that's what people don't understand about storage. Like you mentioned, like storage started wherever it was, Texas or whatnot, but it really took hold in California, particularly Southern California, but it spread all across California, as you saw. And the reason why was it was an economic need out of California. And it had to do with that limited space. It had to do with the economics of higher cost of real estate, right? And regulations on real estate that drove it. And so when I look at things like what's happening with valet storage in the Bay Area, people dismiss it, but I go, the economics that drove storage first in California spread across the nation. Why do you think it wouldn't do the same? Right? And just because in your area it may be 15, 20 years out, right, doesn't mean it's not coming because you live in a rural area or whatnot. But for most metropolitan areas like New York, like Miami, right, things like that, that's where it always goes first. But technology, like real estate, has this thing where once they hit capacity, then they can deliver that at a cheaper cost, and then they can go into other markets because you have customer adaptation that, like you said, then they want it. So it doesn't need to be an economic driver at first. In small areas, it won't come because of the economic. But because it's an economic driver, they can test, solidify the business model, get customer adaptation, and from there, they can drive into markets where it's not an economic driver, but then it becomes a customer driver. Mm-hmm. Hence the reason why we have self-storage in rural markets, where you're like, why would you use self-storage in rural markets? It doesn't seem to make sense, but it's customer adaptation. And that's where I think the danger is. And people that dismiss it, I think you are exactly right, are short-sighted. And because you don't feel the impact of a business model now does not mean that it will not be adapted way quicker than you see in the future. Because once the economic adaptation weans and the customer adaptation accelerates, it can be adapted everywhere. And you're really at the heart of this. So I value that opinion, and I think more people should. And I think that it's very much ignored in the self-storage space. But somebody like you that is seeing it and seeing what can happen and what it'll do, it is a valid thing and a concern. And the answer is exactly what Steve just said, everybody. Adaptation for us to use the same business model. Because if customers adapt it, we adapt it. It doesn't matter if you don't want it. If the customers do, we do. So Steve, like he's saying, and I've had conversations with Steve about this, and me, Steve, and Lance had a lengthy conversation about a year ago about how we could utilize technology and open APIs to overlay our assets to adapt more of the Valet model, and it's a plug and play. Because we, like you just said, we have a real estate advantage. They have a tech advantage. So if we had the tech, we could overlay that on our real estate and then charge the customers for it. Now, it's not an existential threat, but an added value option that we can utilize. And so I think you're approaching that exactly correct and ahead of the curve. And everybody needs to, and everybody should listen to that, is don't ignore it. Don't act like it's not coming. Instead, how do we look at our assets and how do we look at that technology to adapt it? I think, Steve, that conversation and what you're saying right there will be very, very vital here in 5 years. And people that were ignoring it will be now talking about it and what you're experiencing there. I really do believe that. And I think it's really, really important.
So, success breeds complacency.
Yes, it does. And storage has been too successful for too long. And way, way too successful. Like doing nothing and being outrageously successful. And I think that's changing.
But we're the only industry that has not been disrupted in our entire economy. And it should not be a threat. Okay, we have to be conscious of and test and retest and try out new things. And we cannot remain complacent. And unfortunately, there's so many people out there, that feel that we're a very static industry. We're not. We have to be dynamic. We have to be looking at and making mistakes. That's okay to make a mistake, but learn from it and grow from it. And as you said, maybe the first users of Valet storage found it uneconomical. They made mistakes. We can learn from their mistakes and apply those same product services much better than a Valet operator will ever be able to apply them, because the biggest thing, we've got real estate right in the central, right in the market.
Yes.
And we can deliver much quicker, or the customer can come get their stuff much quicker. They'll be safer because it's all contained inside their own personal unit that is secured. So it's
and cost efficient. You can deliver it at a much lower cost.
Much more, much more.
Yes. I just think that's amazing. Well, Steve, we don't need to take any more of your time, but we are very appreciative of your insight. There are so few people that have this kind of insight in the self-storage space today. Where can anybody go learn about your company, what you guys do? Where would you direct people to go that's maybe listening?
Sure. We are StoragePRO Management, and you can find us on the website at StoragePRO.com, and our third-party management services, StoragePROManagement.com.
Wonderful.
Perfect. We'll put those in the show notes.
Yes.
Thank you, Connor, and thank you, AJ. I really enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully we can do it again.
Thank you again for your time, Steve, and I'll talk to you soon.